Imagine your bones crumbling inside your body, not breaking, crumbling, like old chalk turned to dust. Imagine your jawbone falling out of your face in pieces while you're still alive. When researchers exhumed some of the Radium Girls' bodies decades later for scientific study, their bones were still glowing, still radioactive, still deadly to touch. These women have been dead for almost a century, and their remains are still contaminated. They will glow for another 1,000 years. You're dying from the inside out, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. Now imagine that the people who did this to you knew it would happen. They watched you poison yourself day after day, and they smiled. They told you it was safe. They told you to put it in your mouth. This isn't a horror movie. This is history. This is what happened to hundreds of young women in America in the 1920s. In the 1920s, radium was being sold as a miracle. The wealthy drank radium water from crystal glasses, believing it would give them energy and youth. Radium cosmetics promised to make your skin glow with health. Radium chocolate, radium butter, radium toothpaste. If you could eat it, drink it, or smear it on your body, someone was selling a radioactive version. People genuinely believed this stuff would make them immortal. The irony is sickening. Companies realized they could make fortunes painting watch dials with radium so soldiers and workers could read them in the dark. Factories opened across America, and they needed workers with steady hands and fine precision. So they hired young women, teenagers really, girls as young as 14. The factories were painted as glamorous workplaces. Good pay, clean work. You'd sit at a table with other girls, chatting and laughing while you painted delicate numbers onto watch faces. What could be better? But there was a technique they had to learn. The brushes were too thick, so to get a fine point, the supervisors taught them to do something very specific. Place the brush between your lips, twist it to a point with your tongue, dip it in radium paint, then paint. Hundreds of times a day, thousands of times a week, for months, for years. They were swallowing poison and they had no idea. At first, it seemed magical. The radium paint would get everywhere, in their hair, on their skin, on their clothes. When they left work at night, they would literally glow, a soft, greenish-white light emanating from their bodies like ghosts walking through the streets. The girls loved it. They'd paint their lips and nails with the radium for fun. They'd dust it on their faces to shimmer at dances. Men would stare in amazement as these luminous creatures walked by. The girls called themselves the Ghost Girls, and they wore the title with pride. Some would go home and turn off all the lights just to watch themselves glow in the mirror. It was like having a superpower, but the glow wasn't beauty. It was death, announcing itself. Inside their bodies, the radium was being absorbed into their bones. Radium is chemically similar to calcium, so the body treats it the same way, storing it in the skeleton, in the teeth, in the jaw. Except radium doesn't sit quietly. It decays. It emits radiation. And slowly, particle by particle, it destroys everything around it. The half-life of radium-226 is 1,600 years. Do you understand what that means? It means that once it was inside them, it would outlive them by millennia. Their bones would still be radioactive long after their bodies turned to dust. The radium was eating them from the inside. Their bones became so fragile that simply lying in bed could cause fractures. Some women's legs broke while they were sleeping. Others would cough and crack their own ribs. Tumors grew. Massive, grotesque tumors that swelled their faces and necks into unrecognizable shapes. The pain was constant, burning, inescapable, and through it all, they still glowed. Even as they wasted away, even as their bodies fell apart, they emitted that ghostly light. When some of these women died and were buried, people reported seeing a faint luminescence rising from their graves at night. The earth itself seemed to reject them, glowing with their poisoned remains. But here's the most monstrous part of this story. The companies knew. The executives at U.S. Radium Corporation and other companies knew radium was deadly. How do we know they knew? Because they protected themselves. The scientists handling radium used lead screens, tongs, and protective masks. They never touched it with bare skin. They certainly never put it in their mouths. But when the dial painters started getting sick, the companies lied. They said radium was harmless. They hired doctors to examine the dying women and write false reports claiming they had syphilis or other diseases, anything to shift the blame away from the factory. They called these young women liars, prostitutes, hysterics, all while watching them die. The companies employed every legal delay tactic imaginable when the women tried to sue. Why? Because they knew if they stalled long enough, the women would simply die before the case reached trial, and they said this out loud in corporate meetings. Their strategy was to wait for these women to die. In 1927, 5 women, Grace Fryer, Edna Hussman, Catherine Schaub, Quinta MacDonald, and Albina Larice, decided to fight anyway. They were already dying. Their bodies were falling apart. But they would not go quietly. When the case finally made it to court, Grace had to be carried into the courtroom. She couldn't walk. But they worked. The nation was horrified. The media descended. And finally, people started asking questions. The case settled in 1928. The women received money. Not much, nowhere near enough for a life. But more importantly, they'd forced the truth into the light. They'd made the companies admit what they'd done. But the victory was Pyrrhic. Most of them would be dead within a few years. Here's what keeps me up at night about this story. Those women were never supposed to matter. They were working-class girls, expendable, replaceable. The companies literally calculated that their lives were worth less than the cost of safety equipment. But those women refused to be forgotten, even as their bodies betrayed them, even as they were smeared and slandered, even as they knew they were dying. They fought. And they won something precious, not for themselves because it was too late for them, but for every worker who came after. The Radium Girls case established the right to sue your employer for occupational diseases. It led directly to the creation of workplace safety standards. It helped birth OSHA. Every safety regulation, every protection that workers have today was built on the broken bodies of women like Grace Fryer. When researchers exhumed some of the Radium Girls' bodies decades later for scientific study, their bones were still glowing, still radioactive, still deadly to touch. These women have been dead for almost a century, and their remains are still contaminated. They will glow for another 1,000 years. They wanted to shine bright. They wanted to matter. They wanted to be remembered. And now they will glow forever. A warning carved in radioactive bone. Remember what was done to them. And remember that every single worker protection we have today was paid for in human suffering. This is the story they never meant to be told. But now you know.